The last 3 Sundays, including annual conference, we have had lessons about the road we walk to follow Jesus. The road to Jericho for the Good Samaritan, the road to Damascus for Saul when he becomes Paul, and last week with District Superintendent Wendy, just hiking with Jesus. Knowing that Lori had signed us up for a sermon, I found myself reflecting on my calling experiences. Whether I listened to Jesus or the messengers that are sent to share my path. Today's reading in Matthew comes after Jesus has sent out the 12 disciples on the road to do their practicum missionary work. And then these last few short verses, finishing up chapter 10, talk about listening to, learning from, and serving these messengers. At the age of 20, I thought I had life together pretty well. Was active with the Lutheran Church, had a good family, and had good summer jobs. Half of the summer I would spend in Naknek, Alaska, and the other half in Astoria, working with Bumblebee Seafoods, earning enough to pay for college each year. But I was still anxious about the future. It was the time of the civil rights kind of cooling down and the Vietnam heating up, and we were walking on the moon. So what was my future going to be? Life partner, family, career, all that normal kind of stuff that you worry about at age 20. So I was reflecting back on a time that I was hiking across the tundra up above the cannery in Naknek, and sat down along the bank and was praying or meditating or just in a mellow mood with sunset coming on, watching the fishing boats down in the river and watching the tide change really quickly up there as the river went into Bristol Bay. And I think I expressed some of the anxiety to God, and the simple answer came back that I will always be with you on your path. I will be walking the road with you. That was simple, but it was reassuring. So, with the sermon responsibility, I found myself reflecting on my ability to recognize and listen to God's guidance, especially from unlikely people that were on the road with me. I would like to share 3 of them. Greg was one of my best friends in high school. He was liked by everybody. He was the student body president. We shared responsibilities as Luther League leaders. And we both went to Pacific Lutheran University our freshman year. But things changed for Greg. His bipolar disease manifested itself, and he became a religious extremist. He believed God would cure his poor vision, so he threw away his glasses. And he slowly flunked all of his classes and dropped out. The campus services were too tame, and so he joined a local congregation and had to prove his faith by getting involved with glossolalia, or speaking in tongues. He continued to live in the Tacoma, Seattle area. I tried to stay friends, but he was hard to be around. My junior year, I transferred down to Eugene and semi-lost track of Greg. When we moved to Lebanon in '79, Greg's mother had moved from Astoria to Albany, and she was one of the teaching nurses at the Lebanon hospital. So we made connections back again. Greg was living on disability assistance and low-paying jobs in Seattle, and he would visit Albany 2 or 3 times a year. And it was wonderful to get together with him, but it was also very uncomfortable on these visits. Greg was active in his Seattle church, teaching with deep biblical understanding. He had gained weight due to his psych meds. He had become diabetic. And he shared his very limited funds doing street ministry. He was always expressing his love to Lori and to me, and constantly praying for the world. We never visited Greg in Seattle. We could have learned a lot more about God's love and God's guidance. Father Ralph, he was kind of a St. Francis in our life. In 1984, we spent 6 weeks doing volunteer medical work at a Catholic charity hospital in St. Lucia in the Caribbean. It was one of the best family vacations I think we ever did. Ralph did Mass 3 times a week. He served as the medical director for the clinic and the hospital. He was a wonderful uncle to our family and our kids. And he was willing to be on call 24 hours a day so that we could get our breaks every afternoon and go find one of the beaches we liked. Ralph, talking to him, he felt he was living the easy life. Our St. Francis started as a high school science teacher, felt the calling to go into the priesthood, and then to medical school. He had worked with the very poor families in Peru, but the drug lords were threatening their lives. Ralph knew too much. His life was in danger. And so the church sent him to St. Lucia. He wanted to go back to where he really felt that he was needed. We loved Ralph, but we never did similar mission work again. Life got in the way. We just lost track of Ralph and what work he was doing. We could have learned a lot more about God's calling and God's love. Bob, a very different example of how God shows grace. In the early 2000s, I was a medical director at our only nursing home in Lebanon. Therefore, I did the care for the admissions that did not have a local doctor. Bob was dying of alcoholic liver disease at age 50. Good nutrition and people in his life slowly turned his health around. His social history was that of being a teacher and a family man, but alcohol led to job loss, led to divorce, and he was living on the street before he ended up in our nursing home. After a month of care at the nursing home, about a month of care, Bob met Nancy, a 40-year-old with severe MS. She was so weak she could hardly hold a paintbrush to do her art therapy. Bob shared in the art therapy, and eventually he got healthy enough to be a care helper for her. And they eventually got healthy enough with the combination to move into adult family or adult living facility. She survived another 16 months. He continued his calling as a helper in a home specializing in care for people with severe neurologic diseases. I continued to care for Bob in his heart disease and his digestive problems, but mostly I loved hearing about him talk about his love for the life that he was living. When we took the discipleship class in 2010, Pastor Sue Owens asked us about any miracles that we had shared in our life. And Bob was one of those miracles. He helped me to learn about God's love and guidance. These are just 3 of the many people that God sends to share our path. I would like to conclude with once again reading the poem that Reverend Wendy had last week. Jesus is hiking along with us, and in the many people we don't always appreciate. May I walk this day in the realm of grace, walking with you, my feet firmly in your earth path, my heart loving all kindred, my words and deeds alive with justice. May I walk as blessing, meeting blessing at every turn, in every challenge blessing, in all opposition blessing, in harm's way blessing. May I walk each step in the moment of grace, alert to hear you and awake enough to say a simple yes.